All right, everyone, if you could please take your seats. We're going to wrap up our conference here. So as Professor Garcia mentioned, that last panel transitioned us quite nicely into our closing conversation for the conference, which is a conversation with Commissioner Rohit Chopra of the Federal Trade Commission. A zealous advocate for a fair and functional marketplace, Commissioner Chopra, before serving with the FTC, helped create the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau and worked there as its assistant director. His conversant today will be Professor Nathan Schneider of the University of Colorado's Media Studies program, an author and journalist who has written extensively about technology and specifically models for democratic ownership and governance of online platforms and protocols. So please join me in welcoming Commissioner Chopra and Professor Schneider.
Commissioner Chopra, thank you so much for joining us today. And thank you also, Amy, for a fantastic conference and all those who put together, Connor as well. I want to start with where you find yourself sitting. When you came onto the commission, when you took your seat, what did you think about that seat meaning? What role do you see regulators such as yourself playing in shaping the economy? How do you see it as having shaped the economy that we live in today?
It's a great question. I think I came to the commission very clear-eyed about, frankly, where the FTC had failed on the job. I was part of establishing the original team at the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau, which many of you may know really was created out of the ashes of the mortgage crisis. And guess which agency was responsible for policing the non-bank mortgage sector? It was the FTC. I had also been part of regulating the student loan industry. And the massive kickback scandal between the schools and the non-bank student lenders, the agency that should have been on the beat was the FTC. So I come to the role with a real deep sense of humility about what is the cost of inaction and turning a blind eye. And there's no question, the FTC goes very, very hard on small businesses and small scammers, but sometimes has not been driven by data, focused on evidence when it comes to some of the bigger market problems. So I really think that the role of this agency actually is to make sure not only that people aren't being cheated, but it's also about making sure that we get back to what we used to have in America, which is that people with good ideas get to break into a business, and if they're smart and if they have a better idea, then they get the rewards. And I'm worried that in so many industries in America today, that American dream is a myth, and it is harder and harder to get in. And it's not just about a competition of ideas amount, it's about who you're connected to. And frankly, getting the permission of those who are dominant is often the case in so many sectors of this economy today.
And now you're finding yourself looking at the tech sector and involved in major cases involving that sector. Now, since this has been a kind of ongoing back and forth over the course of the last couple of days, I just want to get your cards on the table a little bit. Do you like technology?
I do, and in fact,
are you one of these Luddites?
No. And in fact, you know, the title of the conference that Amy put together was about optimism and pessimism, and I'm actually supremely optimistic about the way technology can really just help our lives move for the better. And one thing I think about is, are we seeing behavior in the market or structures in the market that are deterring entry, about making it harder to get in? You know, when I talk to people in venture capital, when I talk to those who are allocating financial resources to those with ideas, I get scared because I hear them saying, you know, I don't want to fund things that I can't sell to one of the big tech companies. You know, I don't want to fund something that can get bullied out pretty easily. So this worries me because I actually want more technology and innovation. And of course, there are places where, I understand societies can feel it's moving too fast and you need watchdogs and democratic forces controlling that. But I want to see us have more of the fruits of innovation. And that's why I look a lot to, generations before of antitrust enforcement that has been the bedrock of how Americans created a lot of leadership in technology. We did not do what the Europeans did generations ago, which is pick a few companies to make their national champions. That's not what we did. We chose to have a very dynamic, competitive marketplace that sought to lower barriers to entry, that created broad access, and that's how we outcompeted other economies in the world. And this is why I get very concerned when you hear from people like Sheryl Sandberg saying, you guys have to protect, the largest incumbents if we're going to position ourselves against China. I don't want to be like the Chinese economy, where, you get to pick and choose who's close to the government and then they become Goliaths and use that power. We should be devoted to meritocracy and competition to fuel more innovation. So that's kind of how I hope we can reap the rewards of technology.
So is there a sense, having come from regulating other sectors, banking, education, this sort of thing, is there a sense in which technology is different? Does it require a whole new apparatus and expertise? Or is this just the same set of problems around power and politics and concentration? I mean, is this something where we really need a kind of whole new regime?
Right. Well, it's interesting. I in the private sector served a lot of big industries and consulting, have now been a regulator of a few industries, and every industry thinks it's a special flower. And, in banking, everyone would say, oh, you got, government doesn't understand, they can't do this. But actually, there are principles in how to police bad actors in the economy that are consistent. There are principles about how to look at market structure that are consistent. Take banking. There has long been a framework of structural separation of banking and commerce, because they know that if you control the infrastructure, you will use it to preference yourself in other lines of business. There's the concepts of FDIC insurance. There are certain core services like deposits that are on its own and should not be commingled with other types of risky businesses. There is a concept of looking at boards, and should there be board directors overlapping with each other. These are common issues that we should just think about, and you see this in the Communications Act. You see this in many types of commercial regulatory schemes that actually have been, fairly timeless. So of course there are unique aspects of today's technology markets, particularly the multi-sided markets, and how network effects can lead to some unique types of issues and harms. But again, I think we have to think about and be skeptical of arguments that we're just so special, and we're only special because it's only the genius of our people that has created all of this innovation. And just like banking, just like many sectors, a lot of the leadership and innovation was actually because of government investment and policies.
I always think about how right across from the high voltage lines from the Googleplex, there's the Ames NASA Research Center, this crumbling infrastructure of government investment. And it's a crucial part of the story.
Yeah, I mean, if you look at the iPhone, there's been studies that show that it rests on, dozens and dozens of government-funded patents. And I think the reality is that you need a government that is actively promoting entry, actively promoting innovation, not allowing some core technologies that, frankly, citizens of the United States paid for to simply be in a private vault. And that's what a lot of actions we have to start thinking about. If there is abuse, for example, of patents and intellectual property, maybe we got to think a bit just like other remedies for other crimes, that if you're using it to commit a crime or misconduct, then maybe that public benefit needs to be taken away, or maybe it needs to be shared with others. This is a bedrock principle of antitrust enforcement that I think will be so critical as we think about remedies if there is misconduct in the marketplace.
Now, on your commission, in the big decisions on tech, in the case of Facebook and YouTube, you've been a dissenter saying that the settlements didn't go far enough. What to you does accountability look like in this sector? What do you want those CEOs lying in bed awake at night worrying about?
Well, I don't want people laying awake in fear. I want people to know that there's one set of laws that everyone has to follow. In the last panel, we heard about the Children's Online Privacy Protection Act. And here's what happens when small businesses violate it. Their executives get named, they basically get shut down, and the sanctions are crippling. But when YouTube engaged in clear and utter violation of the law, they pay a fine, and the remedy is we're going to start shifting the burden to small businesses to go after them. I mean, this doesn't make sense. Monetary remedies, when you can profit after paying the fine, this is not a remedy. This is not a penalty. This is an incentive. So the Facebook case in particular, really drew some of that distinction. Again, you have a firm that is controlled by one individual, essentially. They have super voting rights. It's revealed that there's not even a deposition of the individual. This is wrong. We have to remind ourselves that there is not two separate sets of laws for large firms and small firms. And this is what annoys a lot of small firms, is they feel if they cross the line, they're dead. But if a larger firm does, they lobby their way out of accountability. So we have to get the rule of law part, in line. The second part is we've got to start thinking about remedies, especially when it comes to anti-competitive conduct. It must restore health to the marketplace as if that violation did not occur. So if you are in a situation where you're engaged in anti-competitive conduct, whether it's violating Section 2 of the Sherman Act or any of the other antitrust laws, an illegal merger under the Clayton Act, sometimes it's not so easy to undo it. You actually have to think very carefully about how you are going to restore it to the original circumstance. And you may never be able to truly restore it without thinking very broadly about remedies. So it may not just be, a breakup. The commission just ordered a breakup in the case of Autobach. It was a consummated merger, but the illegal acquisition, you can't just undo that because those assets might have been spoiled. So you have to think very broadly about what were the instrumentalities that were used in the conduct. Does it mean you need to ban certain contract terms that they impose? Does it mean you need to require licensing of intellectual property that was used in the wrongdoing? And again, it must be bigger than just thinking about spin-offs and divestitures. It has to fundamentally restore the health to the marketplace as if the wrongful conduct did not occur.
And what kinds of remedies do you think are going to come to the fore here in particular? I mean, we have talked about public ownership, both across the aisle here as well as in the UK. We see conversations about interoperability. Is it a tech solution? Is it a corporate structure solution? How do you understand the kind of broader patterns of what's going to be needed?
Well, really, it is going to be very case specific. I try and stay in constant communication with our state attorneys general who are working on a lot of these cases. There's a lot of activity in the thinking on both sides of the Atlantic. And it really depends. I mean, there are going to be technological solutions. We've certainly seen that in the past. You know, we saw the FCC and the DOJ order essentially an interoperability remedy as it relates to AOL Instant Messenger. There are many cases where the FTC has banned certain types of contract terms that give exclusivity. There's a range of that. We also see cases where the FTC and others have essentially sought to clone a company. In some ways, the sale of assets to former employees, ways that very broadly think about restoring competition. And for me, one of the most important aspects is making sure that entry remains vibrant. Because if we look at history, whether it's the AT&T case, whether it's the Microsoft case, it's fundamentally about deterring entrance, about using your power in one market to essentially dominate another one that's adjacent to it. And that's what we have to make sure that when that happens illegally, the costs to our society are big. That means fewer great ideas are commercializing and getting onto the marketplace. It means that people who are working hard and are the best suited to lead and run an enterprise or product or service, they are deprived of that. So I think a lot, again, about entry, and also those who commit misconduct must be deprived of the fruits of that crime. So this is a basic principle, and it's not just money. It's also about what other power did you acquire wrongfully, and what do we do to unwind that. So it's complicated, it's fact specific. I'm not trying to blow off the question, but it's going to involve a wide range of tools. And I think the more that the commission, should there be findings of misconduct and should there be an order, it's going to need to be based on a lot of evidence and, frankly, a lot of the learnings of how market structure will need to operate in order to be vibrant, and so that we as a country can really stay ahead and not really, I just want to reiterate this, I don't think a Chinese-style economic framework where there's a few big giants that are connected to the government, this is exactly the opposite, I think, of the of the market structure we would want in America.
Now, you're sitting there in Washington, D.C. Meanwhile, over here in Colorado, we have a new attorney general who has been organizing these meetings for years and has been thinking through these questions really hard. We've talked some about the relationship between federal legislation, federal policy, and states and patchworks and hodgepodges and this sort of thing. From where you sit, what do you think about states taking action on some of these same questions?
Well, I think we have a system of federalism, and states have long been very involved in the regulation of commerce, and you do get a little worried when you hear arguments from some firms that they should be exempt from certain state laws while their equivalent small operator that may be operating in that state, somehow has to follow those laws as well. And I think about this, a lot. There is and my prior on this, which I should disclose, is that in the mortgage market, which was devastating to our whole country when it was poorly policed, the federal government preempted almost all of the state anti-predatory mortgage lending laws. And that was a huge mistake. And so I guess I'm a little bit skeptical, well, maybe deeply skeptical, of very, very broad preemption that basically says, Washington knows best, let's delete all these state laws. And look, I get what large businesses think. They don't want to have to comply with lots of laws, but welcome to democracy. This is actually how our system is set up. And yes, sure, advocate for consistency. There are many areas of commercial regulation where there are states that pass uniform laws and they attempt to not conflict with each other. But there's a lot of cases where States may wish to provide enhanced protections on discrete issues, whether it comes to facial recognition or other biometrics protection, that I think there's a real role for that. So, we're gonna see states continue to do this, especially when they see, Washington not passing things. So we shouldn't be surprised about it. And my hope is that ultimately we're going to create a framework that, is not going to be one that feels like it's a bunch of random stuff, but thoughtful, evidence-based approach that actually is there to create a marketplace that is competitive, but also, respects citizens' rights.
Now, finally, just to wrap up, what would make you think that you can start sitting on your hands again? And what would make you think that all is well with tech? What would a healthy system look like?
So look, this is always the challenge and beauty of our market system, is that the role of the regulators is in some ways to make sure that markets are always staying vibrant, competitive, and have a lot of entry. But it is natural for businesses to want to juice their returns on equity by finding ways to extract rents from adjacent markets where they have market power. So I don't see this as a book we have to write with a beginning, middle, and end. This is an ongoing, it's more of a goal that we have to constantly strive for. The last panel, we also heard about the FTC Act's prohibition on unfairness. And it was not about a listing of every single thing that was wrong, but it was a principle that we use based on evidence to determine how we're going to figure out what type of conduct should be prohibited. And that really is the role of commercial regulators, to be a tough cop on the beat, but also to provide clear rules and to honor the basic premise of markets, which is naturally going to lead those to seek profit at the lowest cost possible. So thinking about conflicts of interest, thinking about contracts, thinking about competition, all of this is part of supporting a U.S. economy that can grow and be dynamic.
Well, thank you so much for joining us and helping us wrap up this gathering. We look forward to seeing what you do next up there.
Great, thank you.
All right. Thank you all.
I think were they taking questions? Or?
Thank you so much, Nathan and Commissioner Chopra. So we've talked a lot about optimism and pessimism here today. I'm going to do a in-the-room version, apologies for those on the live stream, poll of Pierre's debate poll yesterday. How many, when you walked in the room yesterday or today, whenever you got here, would have said you were a tech optimist? It's a good number of the room. Pessimist? How many of you changed your mind between yesterday and today? Or like 6 people. I'm going to take that as a victory. How many of you would now say you're a tech skeptic? Realist? And now that other things have been introduced. Just a few things before I release you all to lunch. Thank you all so much for coming out and engaging. I hope you lived to my challenge of introducing yourself to 5 new people you hadn't met yet. If you haven't, you have one last opportunity over lunch to chat with a few people you haven't been in contact with before. I want to let you know we still have hoodies available if you'd like to purchase a Silicon Flatirons hoodie. They're being modeled around the room. Blake, do you want to stand up over here on this side? Professor Reed? Vanessa? Great kind of spring. We're going to spring, so great spring weather hoodies. Lunch is available next door. Please recycle your name badges. And just a quick preview of events we have coming up. Professor Brad Bernthal will be hosting a crash course on M&A on February 26th. Professor Garcia, who you saw on the last panel, she is hosting a content conference on March 5th. We have a health data conference hosted in Denver on April 6th, and I'm happy to announce for the first time that Silicon Flatirons is going to be launching a new initiative on health data. So if you're interested in that, come up and let's have a chat. And finally, our AI conference hosted by Professor Harry Sturden, who you also saw here today, is on April 24th. Thank you all for coming out. I hope to see you at another event very soon. Enjoy lunch.